Okay, so what we're going to look at now is DeMorgans Laws. So here's DeMorgans Laws. It's not the prettiest thing to look at, but we'll talk through some examples of it, tie it to English, and I'll give you another visual example of it as well. So DeMorgans Laws say that if you have a negated disjunction, so not, here's the negation, it is the main operator. So it's negating a disjunction right here. You can derive a conjunction where the conjuncts of the original disjunction are now negated. So you see that we have this negated disjunction, and then we reason to a conjunction, but you'll note that both of the conjuncts are negated. And it allows you to reason the opposite direction. So you could reason from a conjunction, like this formula, not P and not Q, to a negated disjunction. So it's a rule that allows you to move back and forth between disjunctions and conjunctions. In addition, DeMorgans Laws also states that if you had a negated conjunction, so this is where like the operator is the and, you can reason to a disjunction, but the disjuncts of the disjunction that you are reasoning to are now negated, as well as vice versa. So you can swap those two formulas back and forth. So if you look at DeMorgans Laws here, we have this negated disjunction, and we can reason to a conjunction, but now the conjuncts are negated. In addition, you can reason the other direction. So you could reason from the negated disjunction to the conjunction, or from the conjunction to the negated disjunction. Same thing with the other one. You can reason from the negated conjunction to a disjunction, where the disjuncts are negated, and you could reason the other direction. Okay, so I think DeMorgans Laws is important, but I really don't think people tend to learn them just by looking at the rule itself. You learn it by using it, looking at some examples, thinking about it in different, from different perspectives. So let's try to look at it from different perspectives and hopefully get a clearer sense. So one question that you might have is that, isn't this somewhat related to the truth tree rules that you have for propositional logic? And the answer is yes, in a way. So let's say you had a negated disjunction. So then if you had a negated disjunction and you're going to use a truth tree rule, you would use the negated disjunction decomposition rule, and that would require you to stack the formulas, and you would have this negated disjunction stacking. So that kind of tells you, hey, what's going on here? We have this negated disjunction, and we're reasoning basically to a conjunction, but we just tend to stack it right here where both the sides are negated. The kind of difference, though, is that in this case, we can reason the other direction. You can reason from this negated, this conjunction with the two negations back in the other direction. So it's a little bit different from the tree rules from propositional logic. Okay, so let's take a look at DeMorgans Laws. So let's start with English. DeMorgans Law says you take a formula of one type, you can swap it out with another, and vice versa. And there's something similar that goes on in English, that people can sometimes say the same thing in two different ways, and you have these equivalent expressions in English. So if someone says neither P nor Q, we say they're saying the same thing if they say not P and not Q. And so if they were to reason from neither P nor Q to a sentence, not P and not Q, we'd say, yeah, that's a perfectly fine way to reason, because they're just saying the same thing. And they could reason back the other direction. If they said not P and not Q, they could reason back to neither P nor Q. What this is involving is you're reasoning from a negated disjunction to, if you look at not P and not Q, to a conjunction where the propositions or the conjuncts are both negated. Same thing is the case with the negated conjunction. If someone says not both P and Q, so they're saying not both of these, then they're reasoning to not P or not Q. And so if you were to do a truth table for these particular formulas, you would see that they're true and false under the same scenarios. Okay, that's one way of thinking about it. Maybe you're more English inclined, and so you try to think through the rules in terms of the English language. So let me give you one more example along these lines. So let's say I said, I don't want, I want neither bread nor a cupcake. So you make this bread and I say, ugh, that bread looks gross. And then I look at your cupcake as well and I say, ugh, that cupcake looks gross. Why did you put the frosting on it like that? And so you say, I want neither your bread nor your cupcake that you've made. You're obviously a terrible baker. And so what does this entail? Well, it entails a conjunction, which is I don't want your bread and I don't want a cupcake. You would understand that. You'd understand if I said this, that either one of these sentences, that you'd be saying the same thing here. The same thing is if you use the negated conjunction. If I said, I don't want both bread and cupcake, here I'd be saying, I might be open to one or the other, or neither, but I definitely don't want both of these at the same time. The bread is a pumpkin loaf, so it's pumpkin based, and the cupcake is a pumpkin based cupcake. And so I would say to myself, if I said, I don't want both bread and cupcake, that's just too much pumpkin for me in one sitting. So I either want one or the other, but not both of them together. And so this would entail, you would understand from what I said from this is that I don't want bread or I don't want cupcake. Okay, so let's look at an example of this. So here is an example in a proof, a simple one-line example where we use DeMorgans laws. So you see at line 1, we have what? We have a negated disjunction here. And so when we apply DeMorgans laws, we take this negated disjunction from line 1 and we turn it into a conjunction. So we're changing the sign from a disjunction to a conjunction. And then we're negating each one of these internal disjuncts here. When we use DeMorgans laws, of course, we want to cite the line. We want to say, okay, I used DeMorgans laws. Here is the justification. I'm telling you I used DeMorgans laws. So you'd write DeMorgans laws or DEM to indicate that this is the rule you used. And when we use DeMorgans laws, we only use one line. We're taking a formula of one type and swapping it out with another. So it applies only to a single line. So you wouldn't cite multiple lines here. Let me remove all this annotation stuff. Here is another example of DeMorgans laws. So if you take a look at line 2, what we have is this conjunction. And one thing to note about this conjunction is both of the conjuncts are negated. So you see that at line 2, we have not R, and we also have not Q. And so we can use DeMorgans laws. And when we're doing this, we're saying, I'm going to take this conjunction and I'm going to turn it into a disjunction. I see that both of those conjuncts are negated. It's not R, it's not Q. And so I can transform it with a formula that says the same thing. It's saying the exact same thing, it's just saying it in a different way. And the rule that allows you to do that again is DeMorgans laws, DEM. And we use it on line 2. So DeMorgans laws is super important. It's very helpful. And the reason it is so important and helpful is it simplifies proofs to an incredible degree. Proofs that would normally take sometimes 30 lines long now can be solved in a couple steps. And so this is one of the reasons it's such a great rule, not because it has any spiritual or mystical qualities to it. It just makes your life so much easier. And so if someone gave you something that says, oh, this makes my life so much easier, you'd say, oh, thank you very much. I'm going to use this all the time because I want my life to be as easy as possible. Because of that, it is helpful to think about ways of remembering how to use DeMorgans laws correctly, just because it is such a helpful rule. So in various cultures, people, especially children, play this game called leapfrog. Sometimes it has different names in different cultures. Sometimes it's called like goat hop. And there are different variations on it. If you've never played this game, that's fine. But the idea is that a person kind of crouches down and you leap over them. And then they try to leap over you, and so on and so forth. And the more competitive version of the game, you kind of get taller and taller, so it makes it more difficult to leap over them. Okay, so thinking about that in mind, this is a really stupid heuristic, but you can think about that game when you use DeMorgans laws to ensure that you use it correctly. So let's say you had a negated conjunction. You have this negated conjunction not, oops. You have this negated conjunction not P and Q. You can think about the negation hopping over the parentheses and applying to the internal parts, the internal conjuncts. So the negation is going to leap over both the left parenthesis right here and apply to the P and apply to the Q as well. In doing so, since Leapfrog is a magical game, is going to transform this conjunction into a disjunction here. So not only is it going to attach to both the P and the Q, but it's going to transform, since Leapfrog again is a magical transcultural game, the conjunction into a disjunction. Now, and the same thing is true for the disjunction, the negated disjunction. We have a negation on the outside. It needs to leap over the parenthesis and apply to both the P and the Q. And in doing so, it is going to transform this disjunction into a conjunction. This is a helpful way of thinking about or visual metaphor if you're more visually inclined and you think, okay, I'm going to use this rule. You said it's important. It's bound to come up in various proofs. You can think about the negation leaping over the parentheses and applying to each of the two parts, and then it changes the sign from either a conjunction to a disjunction or a disjunction to a conjunction. All right, so this is definitely, I think this metaphor is helpful when you have to apply it to complicated negated conjunctions or disjunctions. So I would say take a minute, just write on your piece of paper, whatever scratch you have. If you're going to use DeMorgans laws and apply it to this particular formula that you see here, this negated disjunction, what would that formula look like? So take a minute to try to apply DeMorgans laws to line 1 here. Okay, so let's take a look at what DeMorgans laws would look like. In thinking about this negation, again, it's going to leap over the parenthesis and apply to both of the propositions here, both of the disjuncts. So what it would do is add a negation to each one of those disjuncts. So it would turn it from not P to not P. So it's leaping over the parenthesis and applying to that whole formula. And then it's also leaping over the parenthesis and applying to not Q or S. So it's applying to that whole formula. Now, once you have these not P and not QS, you of course would maybe take off these negations using the double negation rule. But when you're using DeMorgans laws, that negation is leaping over and applying to each one of those subformulas. And then of course it's transforming it from a disjunction, this V here, to a conjunction, that caret there. So the next kind of question to think about is, when should you use DeMorgans laws? And the answer to this is pretty straightforward. You typically use DeMorgans laws in one direction. Use it in the direction of taking a negated disjunction or a negated conjunction and applying it in that direction. That is, taking this negated formula and turning it into a conjunction or a disjunction. The reason for this is because now, once you've used DeMorgans laws in that direction, it just becomes easier to use other rules. So if you use DeMorgans laws on, let's say, not P or Q, you would derive not P and not Q. And when you look at not P and not Q, this is a rule like you can do stuff with. Like you can say, oh, this is a conjunction. Let me break that conjunction down into simpler parts. Now I can use it first with some other formulas. So it turns it into a formula that is easier to use. If you were to reason in the other direction from, let's say, not P and not Q to not P or Q, the next thing you would say is, well, what rule can I use on this? Like, what can I do with this formula? And there really isn't anything. It's like nothing you can do. It's like a formula that just like no rules apply to it. The same thing with the negated conjunction. You have this negation and it negates this whole conjunction here. Use DeMorgans laws and it turns it into a disjunction. Well, now there are some rules that you could say, okay, maybe I can use these rules on this new formula that I have, this disjunction. But if you look at this negated disjunction or negated conjunction, if you think to yourself, like, what rule can I use on this? There's really nothing. There's no rules that are going to help you solve a proof. So in general, we try to use it in the direction of deriving, or whenever we see a negated disjunction in the proof or a negated conjunction in the proof, you should think about using DeMorgans laws. Okay, so here is just an illustration of an example we saw earlier. We saw not R or S. We use DeMorgans laws on it. It turns it from a negated disjunction into a conjunction. And once we do this, then we can break this conjunction down at line 2. It says line 1 conjunction elimination. It really should be line 2 conjunction elimination. That's my bad. So what we're doing here is, now that we've used DeMorgans laws in this direction, we are able to like do something with the resulting formula. Here's another example. So we have a negated conjunction at line 1. And whenever you see a negated conjunction or negated disjunction, you should say to yourself, maybe I should use DeMorgans laws. It's a rule that allows me to get at formulas that I can actually do something with. So if we use DeMorgans laws on line 1, it gives us not R or not S. And this is a formula that we can do something with. We can use disjunctive syllogism on it. And since we have not R or not S, and we have not S, we can say, well, this formula right here cancels out this one. It's not the case that not S, and so it must be R. So again, DeMorgans laws, you should think about using it whenever you have a negated conjunction or a negated disjunction, because it allows you to potentially use other rules to solve your proof. One kind of caveat, this is a sort of rare case, but it may come up, is it's helpful to think about what DeMorgans laws does. It says, I'm going to take a formula and I'm going to swap it out with one that says the same thing, but in a different way. If that's the case, then it can be applied not only to the entire formula, but to parts of formulas, that is subformulas. So if you look at line 1 here, what we see is we have a conditional. So we don't actually have a disjunction or a negated disjunction, but as part of that conditional, what do you see? You see the consequence of this conditional. So a subformula of a larger formula is a negated disjunction. And so what you could do if you wanted to is you could apply DeMorgans laws to this part. You can replace it with a formula that says the exact same thing, but it just says it in a different way. So we can replace this negated disjunction with a conjunction that each of the parts are negated. So this is not like a regular occurrence, but it's similar to, let's say, if you had a conjunction and let's say one of the parts was doubly negated, you could apply double negation to this formula to remove the two negations. And so you're applying it not to the entire formula, but to part of the formula. Again, I want to emphasize that you should always think about using DeMorgans laws whenever you see a negated conjunction or a negated disjunction. It greatly simplifies things, and it should be, I think, your default move whenever you see one of those two formulas. It's helpful, I always think, to have some kind of trigger, some type of heuristic for remembering that though, because it is so important. So even though like logic seems pretty sterile, one way you can think about it is just to think about something really, really gross, something that disgusts you, that you feel like kind of sickened by. And so now that you have that kind of sickened image in your mind, you should associate negated conjunctions and negated disjunctions as sickening. They're gross, they're repulsive. And the reason they're so gross and repulsive is because you cannot do anything with them. You can't apply conjunction elimination on this negated conjunction because it's not a conjunction, it's a negated conjunction. You also cannot apply, let's say, disjunction elimination or disjunctive syllogism on this negated disjunction because it's not a disjunction, it is a negated disjunction. So these rules, I think, are gross, or these formulas are gross because you can't actually apply any rules to them. So the thing you should think about is if you have these gross formulas, and that's kind of weird to say that there are gross formulas, but if you have those gross formulas, one thing that you can do is remove that grossness by applying DeMorgans laws to it. So as soon as you see these formulas, I think it's an effective step in a proof to apply DeMorgans laws immediately, and then you can do something with the resulting formula. Okay, so let's try a couple examples of DeMorgans laws. This one is relatively straightforward, but it's always important to start with the simple proof and then kind of work our way up. Take, I don't know, 2 minutes and try to solve this particular proof right here. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. Line 1, we have a negated disjunction. And so you should say to yourself, oh, gross, this formula is so disgusting. There's nothing I can do with it. What in the world could possibly help me here? Well, the answer is pretty straightforward. You should use DeMorgans laws. Using DeMorgans laws, we're going to negate both the internal disjuncts and we'll turn it into a conjunction. We are, again, going to play our leapfrog game. This negation is going to leap over the parenthesis to this P and leap over to this T. So both of those internal formulas are going to be negated. And we're going to turn this disjunction into a conjunction using DeMorgans laws. Again, we'll cite DeMorgans laws, DEM for DeMorgans laws. And then we're going to cite the line that we used, which was line 1. It's helpful to remember that even though I've just emphasized really strongly that whenever you see a negated disjunction, you can reason to a formula using DeMorgans laws, but you don't also want to forget about, you can use DeMorgans laws to reason in the other direction. So in this case, we have not P and not T. And so when we look at this, if we were to try to derive not P or T, we might not really know what to do here. One thing we could do is take those two formulas, not P and not T, put them together in a conjunction. And so now what do we have here? We have a conjunction and both of the conjuncts are negated. And so we can use DeMorgans laws to reason in the way that is not very common, but still possible, which is to turn this conjunction, this not P and not T, into a negated disjunction. So we can use DeMorgans laws on line 3. Now I just want to, I just throw this out here just because I want to, even though I've emphasized that there's one preferred direction, there's also the other direction that is less common you'd find in a proof, but nevertheless still possible. Okay, let's take a look at another proof. This one is not the easiest proof, but it can be solved in a couple lines. Here is a negated disjunction, and you're asked to reason to simply not S. So take a moment and take, let's say, 5 minutes to try to solve this particular proof. Okay, let's take a look at this one. So we look at this formula, we say, this formula looks gross. It's a negated disjunction. What could possibly help us? Let's use DeMorgans laws. When we're thinking about using DeMorgans laws, we can think about this leapfrog method. This negation is going to hop over the parenthesis and apply to the not R, making it not R, and to this other disjunct, which is M or S. So what does that look like? It looks like not R and not M or S. Oh, this doesn't look very good. This doesn't give us S. This is problematic. So one thing we could do is say, well, now we have a conjunction. Let's break that conjunction apart. We can reason to not are, and if you wrote that down, perfectly fine. That's a good step. But since we see S in that not M or S, let's just reason to that single conjunct using conjunction elimination. We have an and statement, so we can reason to either side. Now at line 3, what do we see? Oh, this is another negated disjunction. Ugh, it is very gross. So let's use DeMorgans laws on it so we don't feel as queasy as we did before. Now we have not M and not S using DeMorgans laws on it. And now we have a conjunction. Great, a conjunction we can do something with. We can break this apart. So you could reason to not M, or you could reason to the conclusion, which is not S. So poof, there it is. Not using conjunction elimination, we reasoned from line 4 to the conclusion, not S.